It was pointed out to her that, this was an AI deepfake. And she said, I'm not taking it down because it's emblematic of what's going on.
Welcome to CHATROG, the podcast where we explore the ethical questions raised by artificial intelligence. I'm Roger Steare, the corporate philosopher. My guest today is Graham Lovelace, a prominent UK-based commentator and strategist in the field of AI and media, best known as the AI truth teller for his myth-busting and critical analysis concerning the social impacts and risks of generative AI. He is an award-winning journalist and editor with over 40 years of experience at the intersection of media and technology, having worked with major broadcasters and founded influential media ventures. Graham, welcome to CHATROG. Thank you so much for joining us.
That's a pleasure, Roger. It's great to finally see you, albeit on a computer, not in real life yet.
Indeed. And we've had lots of conversations and supporting comments on LinkedIn. So let's dive in. After spending decades in legacy media, what motivated you to start charting Gen AI?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. I have been for the last 15 years after those corporate media jobs that you mentioned. I've been largely consulting and producing events, talking about the future of media. And I was doing a big writing project for a client. And towards the end of that project, the client thanked me for all the notes and things that I'd submitted and said, of course, you could have used Google Bard. Now, at the time, I hadn't heard of Google Bard. It's now called Google Gemini, of course, and very quickly got off the call and researched everything I possibly could about Google Bard. And that introduced me to generative AI. The initial impression, Roger, was, oh my God, what on earth is this? And the damage that it was likely to cause my industry, journalism and content production in the broad realm, really. And I immediately started to think, in terms of this replacing, substituting creativity, all of that. And then very soon afterwards, I realized, wait a minute, the more I looked into it and the more I was throwing some obscure questions, really sort of long tail content questions, I could start to see how it worked. And that the fact that it had scraped content, that it had repurposed content. There were no links or citations back then. And of course, it was doing this, passing off, we'd say in journalism, without any permission. And that got me onto there's something big happening. There's something big coming down the tracks. That there's something not right. And that started me on the journey which I'm on today, which is revealing the not right bit of generative AI. The fact that it is based on scraping. The content producers, all those behind the world's intellectual property, essentially, were not asked, didn't give their consent, certainly not being compensated for what goes into these AI engines.
Thank you. And you chose the title AI Truth Teller. Why that particular title?
Well, it was to bust myths. I mean, truth teller implies that there are lies being told. And I believe there is a false narrative being perpetuated by big tech. They do it through a number of different ways. First of all, the language that they use with the heavy use of anthropomorphisms. So talking about models that can think, reason, understand, even the word intelligence within artificial intelligence. There is no innate intelligence within an AI model. But the really difficult one for the creative industries is this concept that this will create something. And the language that's used by image generators, music generators, even the chat generators, that by suddenly using one of these models, you're instantly an author or a musician or a director or an artist. And of course, you're not. Now, the AI companies and the big tech companies behind this, they use another phrase, which is called democratizing content or democratizing creativity, as if creativity has somehow been held by gatekeepers in the creative industries, that we sit within these ivory towers and we cling on to through copyright, everything that we've been produced. There's no concept or understanding that that's how we monetize content, that we create something and we expect to be paid for it. And we expect to, when we write a book, we expect people to buy that book and not for that book to be gutted, chopped up into millions and millions of bits and pieces, mixed together with other books, and then spat out of a large language model containing verbatim regurgitations of our copyrighted content. And so that was behind the title. It works very well when I'm speaking on stage. So within the newsletter, I'm largely talking to an audience within Charting Gen AI community. The audience is there, the community generally knows what's going on. And they look to that newsletter, my newsletter, for an element of hope, really, that something's going to be done about this, that the big tech companies are going to start to act more ethically and responsibly. But when I speak on stage to large business audiences and consumer audiences, I'm always struck by the level of ignorance. And it really does reveal just how powerful that big tech narrative has been, particularly among, and this is worrying, policy-making audiences and lawmakers. That they really have no clue whatsoever how these things work, how they're powered, the true impact that this is likely to have on our economies. So they have bought into the narrative, the big tech narrative. This is going to lead to double-digit productivity gains, maybe, but they never really talk about or understand or at least appreciate that within the creative industries, this could lead, and is now leading already. It's now having an impact, which could lead to the eradication of certain tasks within people's jobs, if not entire jobs and swathes of jobs within the creative industries themselves.
Indeed. In other sectors, as you know, lots of CEOs and CFOs have basically said to their boards, look, generative AI means we can actually increase productivity by 20% by removing jobs. They've gone ahead and removed jobs. Productivity increases have not happened. In fact, they've had a decrease in productivity because the large language models are incapable of doing what the tech companies say they can do, and they're having to rehire. We also know that a lot of the tech companies actually have human beings behind the so-called chatbots, actually making sure they do work when they work. Do you use that particular insight in the way that you try and educate users and governments?
Yes, I do. The starting point that largely the audiences I talk to have got some sort of media connection. And I always start off with, and the fact is that most of my career has been spent in the intersection of media, largely journalism, and technology. I'm a massive fan of technology. I'm actually a massive fan of AI when it's used responsibly and when it's generated and built responsibly. But what I always say to people, yes, there are some great opportunities here to use the great strengths of generative AI to spot patterns, to summarize, to create instant translations into multiple languages quicker than any human could ever do. Maybe even preserve some endangered languages, some brilliant work that's going on there. So there is good. There's something here which we need to preserve. But the warning is that it comes with a risk. And that's what I spend a lot of time talking about, and the threats to individuals and to jobs as well. The really big risks that they're sort of in sort of three buckets, really. The first is that it erodes trust. So we're living in an age of AI slop, where the web is drowning in information and imagery that we really don't know if it's true or not. Now, this is absolutely the case in social media, particularly those social platforms that have integrated AI chatbots, trained on those platforms themselves. And we as citizens, as consumers, increasingly are having to ask the question, is this true? Can I believe this? And the worrying thing is that a generation growing up thinking that everything on their phone, or certainly everything on TikTok, is true. They don't really know what sources are. They don't understand provenance. They don't understand what is a reputable information source. They take it at face value. So that's the first really, really worrying area. And then the other threat within media itself is that the over-reliance on AI tools, on generative AI, it damages brand integrity. And what I mean by that is we are prone to make mistakes ourselves as journalists, as writers, as artists, as whatever part of the creative industries we're in. Because the more we use these tools, the lazier we become. And there's a lot of research to show this. There was the Microsoft study earlier in the year, then the MIT study more recently. So the more we use these tools, the lazier we become, and the less likely we are to check the outputs. Now, phrases like cognitive atrophy have been used and brain rot. But I can see that this is happening, particularly a generation, as I say, that, we're sort of lucky. We're of the generation that had to create things by hand. We did have to use our brains. But a generation is going straight to these models, and they don't have necessarily that skill of composing, of constructing nuance, grabbing an audience, holding attention. They're lurching straight for the generative tool with its pristine copy, every paragraph exactly the same length, overuse of bullet points, overuse of phrases like "let's delve into," in a world of, among the many scenarios. I could go on. The third area, though, that is the really, really damaging and the really worrying area for media is it really undermines business models. And then here we come into probably the most disruptive application of generative AI that we're seeing right now, and that's generative search. So as search integrates generative models, I mean, primarily talking Google AI overviews and Google AI mode, we're talking here about the destruction of that value exchange where publishers have allowed their content to create 15, 20 word snippets within traditional classic search, which then drives traffic back to their websites. Because what we're now finding is that within the generative search products, there are links, but they may be wrong. There might be citations which go to the wrong sources. But there is very, very little traffic now coming to those publisher websites, and this will just get worse as time goes on. So the publishers are being more or less forced to still contribute their content, otherwise they won't appear in search at all, but they're getting nothing back for it. Now, this is a huge, huge subject. There's two lawsuits now involving this. One was filed yesterday on this, and there's a complaint both to the UK and European competition regulators. But it's a real worrying concern for the monetization of this, which of course then filters down to people's jobs again.
Thank you. And you've given us several stories there, recent stories, to illustrate the points. What other stories or issues do you tend to focus on, both positive as well as negatives? There's a lot of negative that's going on, a lot of dangers, but what sort of positive stories do you focus on?
Yeah, there's sort of two areas really. There's the new products that are being developed responsibly and ethically, and I focus heavily on those. Good example of that in the States, there's a video generator model from an organization called Moon Valley that has merged with a studio called Steare. The product is called Mari, and that is a video generator that's been trained on licensed content. So with the permission of all those video agencies and individual video creators as well. So that gives great hope. And that is starting to potentially make headway within Hollywood as well, because it's working with the industry and it's a very strong, positive story. So that's a really, really good example of how it could have been done 3 years ago by big tech, rather than just going out and taking and being asked lots of questions later and begging for forgiveness. And now, of course, being shielded from really any regulation by the White House, the Trump administration. The other area of hope that I try to bring is the fact that there are really, really good lawmakers in every jurisdiction that are trying to help, that are trying to do the right thing, that are trying to expose wrongdoing, that are trying to enact new laws, particularly around copyright, particularly around transparency before we get to copyright laws as well. So that creators know that their products, that their hard work, that their creative ingenuity is being acknowledged, potentially could be rewarded. Unless you know that your content has been ingested and is part of a large language model, you've got no idea whether or not you can actually go ahead and seek some sort of licensing deal. Now, that applies whether you're an individual illustrator, translator, all the way up to a major international publisher. We need full transparency of what goes into these models. The AI companies are resisting this. Obviously, they're using all the phrases like, it's confidential information, it's a business secret, it's all part of our secret sauce, or that sort of thing. But there are lawmakers that are trying to open that up, so both in the UK and in the US and in Europe as well. So that's a positive development, and that is bringing a lot of comfort. But I think also it's the fact that behind each facet of our creative industries, wherever we are on the planet, there tends to be a trade body and association um, that's also looking for, they're trying to create collective licensing deals so that creators' content can actually be recognized and again compensated for in exactly the same way that, when you go into a garage here and the radio's playing, that someone is collecting some performing rights royalties, which go right back to the band. Now, it may be Spotify levels. It may be 0.0001 pence per play, but it's something. It's an acknowledgement that your content has been used and that we are going to recompense you for it rather than absolutely nothing. And this sense that it is this blind theft, that you don't even know who the organizations don't know the actual names of the chatbots or the scrapers because the names are changing all the time. So they can't really protect their sites from being scraped. And they certainly don't know, although again, this is starting to be opened up, what's in the dark data sets that are out there. Some great work being done by Alex Reisner at The Atlantic to prise open those secretive data sets. Even Alex admits that he's able to identify quite a lot of material, but not everything.
Indeed. There are two obviously big areas of concern here. One is copyright theft. The other is the area of the myths or the errors, the lies, the hallucinations that are flooding the internet. And in a way, Graham, this is not a new problem. Human beings have been deceiving other human beings as long as we've been on the planet. I mean, misinformation is a very effective form of control. So how can the public separate the claims that are being made, the content that's being put out there, from truth, reality, and genuine creativity and innovation? What can they do, and how can regulators and governments reassure them, do you think?
Yeah, it's a massive issue, and it's not helped when you have bad actors that are deliberately trying to misinform, so that's disinformation. And when you have supposedly reputable characters as well that are reposting this concocted fabrication of reality, and I'm afraid that is now part and parcel of, particularly, certainly going on in America a lot, where we see senior figures essentially amplifying bad content. And of course, what that does is it gives that content credibility. And so Google then spiders that because it's associated with a certain person, or the more stories are then written about that particular scandal, the bots themselves don't know, was the original offending image or story wrong? It all adds to the amplification of it. So it's extremely difficult. I mean, there's some really, really good examples of this. In the US floods last year in North Carolina, there was a situation where there was an image which was clearly a deep-faked image of a girl in a boat with a puppy. Two images. And when you compare and contrast the two images, quite clear that the puppy's muzzle changes color between the two images, the boat color changes. Yes, the girl in one shot has 6 fingers. But a prominent politician in the States, one of the co-founders of Women for Trump, it was pointed out, she posted it on X, and it was pointed out to her that, this was an AI deepfake and that she should take it down. And she said, I'm not taking it down because it's emblematic of what's going on. It's emblematic of the pain I feel that goes straight to my heart of people trying to escape the floods. But she was doing it for a political purpose. She was trying to make out that the Biden administration hadn't handled this properly. And that image remains online to this day. So if you look for, flood disaster victims, that image will come back over and over again because it's given more credibility by politicians continuing to post it. So to answer your question, how can we tell? How, without any AI labeling, which we still don't have, still the social networks do not see the need to apply health warnings on content which is clearly wrong. How on earth do we sort out the wheat from the chaff? How do we separate the truth from the fiction? And I come back to my early days in digital media. So, I go back right to 1992 when we had the online services, CompuServe, AOL, and Prodigy. And then a year and a bit later, we started to have consumer-facing web browsers, and there was the World Wide Web, obviously. And around that time, 93, 94, I was working at Teletext Limited, heavily regulated, TV-based information service where everything had to be completely truthful, accurate, and biased because we were running a television license. So we could be fined if there was a mistake or if someone felt that there was, undue influence or non-impartial content. And the phrase that started to do the rounds then was around something called digital literacy, explaining to citizens the provenance of information, explaining what they could trust, how they could actually go to a website and understand that this is a human-driven website, there's an editorial team behind it, this news is news, it's fact-based. Now, we didn't get it right then, and we certainly haven't got it right now for AI literacy. But a big part of my mission, as part of explaining it to audiences and writing about it within Charting Gen AI, is to say that we're all involved in this as citizens, as consumers, that we need to educate our families, everyone around us, that don't just take this at face value, question it, query it. If you're getting an output from an AI model, whether it's text-based or image-based, do the work after you've got the output. Check that against a search, a classic Google search, not AI overviews. Look for those blue links and do the work. As I say, don't just take it at face value, because if you do, we come back to brand integrity, and you're going to have egg on your face at some stage. You're going to be quoting something which you think is true, but in fact is false, has been made up, has been hallucinated, or indeed you're in danger of violating someone's copyright or even privacy. The really worrying thing, Roger, I do worry about in terms of all these companies have got the need to continually find new sources of data, the training data. And the one thing that I worry about is products which have that sense of it's going to help us in our everyday lives, it's going to be useful. So I'm talking around the latest generation of smart glasses, and something that a friend of mine showed me at a conference recently. He's wearing this little silver clip, and this clip was recording everything that was said in the previous conference session. And then he showed me the AI-generated notes that clip, that device, I'm not sure what it's called, had actually produced, and it was pretty good. Now, I asked a question in that session, and it actually said, Graham Lovelace, editor, publisher, Gen AI, Charting Gen AI. I hadn't actually said my title or that sort of stuff. So it was embellishing. It was doing what it's meant to do. It was making sense and that sort of stuff. It was it looked a good output. But of course, he could have been wearing that on during the coffee break. He could have been wearing this for the rest of his life. And he's generating data, as smart glasses are. They're generating data, and they're going into our private lives. They're recording things, they're seeing things that we may not want to be shared, and we certainly don't want people to see behind the scenes. And that is a real worry, that we're going to start to see identifiable images of our children, our loved ones, the insides of our houses, our passports, our driving licenses. If we've uploaded those to our own photo roll on our phones, it's all going to be used for training data. So there's a massive privacy aspect to this as well, which is often overlooked because we do talk a lot about copyright and that sort of stuff. But there's the other side of this is, as I say, it's holding on to what is dear and private to us, and making sure that is not used at scale by these organizations to train their models.
That's a very powerful answer there, which brings us to responsibility pledges made by some of these organizations. I mean, they don't sound like they're worth the digital paper they're written on. And as you were speaking, I was thinking these tech companies, I mean, most of them are actually advertising agencies. They generate revenues from advertising. And back in the day, I think it still operates, but the Advertising Standards Agency was very, very clear about the quality of advertising, the claims made, and so on and so forth, as well as all the good old-fashioned editorial duties that you were mentioning when you were part of Teletext, and so on and so forth. And yet we're relying on governments where we want to believe that the tech companies will self-regulate. But when it comes to regulation and government, politicians do not have a great track record in being truthful and reliable. So how are we going to do this? How are we going? You mentioned some individual politicians in various places like the States and Europe and so on. But honestly, who's gonna get this to across the line so there's effective regulation rather than self-regulation?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to what you touched on in teletext days, yeah, I mean, the phrase was legal, decent, honest, and true. The advertising, but also the editorial had to be legal, decent, honest, and true.
Wonderful words.
Viewers
Wonderful
didn't
words.
see the difference between the veracity and accuracy of a story on the news page, or a goal score, or a share price, or a holiday in Greece for £14. Now, there was a holiday in Greece for £14 for about half an hour, and then the price would change, but it had to be there, and we would police that, making sure it was legal, decent, honest, and true. We haven't got that with these organizations, and the more that we find out through brilliant investigative journalism, particularly the recent Reuters expose into Meta's chatbots, and the fact that they were trained to engage in conversations with minors that they should never ever have been allowed to do, and the fact that this was all signed off, including by their major or their chief ethicist. I come back to so will politicians get involved? Will they actually enact this? Now, although there are lots of, there's energized politicians on both sides of the aisle in most territories. But can they actually carry this through? Now, some territories, some jurisdictions are. So Australia is taking a very, very serious approach to social media and minors. And they're now starting to add chatbots to that as well. So the e-safety commissioner, will be writing about that this week. The e-safety commissioner in Australia is now looking to add chatbots to that legislation so that the major providers of those chatbots are brought into some sort of regulatory sphere. But in the US, of course, and here in the UK, there's, we have the Online Safety Act, but it comes back to, will they actually mend their ways? Will they change what they're doing? And I come back to, they'll only do that when there is mass consumer awareness, when there is pressure on politicians, but when there's pressure on the organizations themselves. Yes, they are advertising businesses, but they are also businesses. And if we stop using these tools, if we stop using these products, they will notice that very, very quickly. So I liken this to cars being sold without seatbelts. My dad had a car in the 70s that didn't have seatbelts in the back, and he bought seatbelts for us because he knew that we needed them. There wasn't a law then, but he felt that we needed to have them. There's an example there of citizens really realizing that something needed to be done, and they did it themselves. Or citizen awareness. I mean, how many decades was it that we were being told still by various cigarette manufacturers in America that smoking, I don't know if they actually said it was good for you, but they certainly didn't say it gave you cancer. But we sort of worked it out. Well, it does, and we tend to work out ourselves what's going on, and then we apply pressure to have something done. And it's an awful thing to say, but I think that the darker sides, the chatbot suicide stories in the States, this epidemic of loneliness that these chatbots are. I mean, are they exploiting it? I don't know. It's the fact that they haven't got the sufficient guardrails in those chatbots to hand over to a live human being, which surely should be the case, given the amount of profits these companies are making. Or should they even be offering these products at all? But that's another conversation. But it probably does take these big standout cases to really permeate and cut through so that we as citizens and consumers realize there's something not right here. And it exposes as well what's going on behind the curtain when you actually start to see in those lawsuits, the two big lawsuits, one's against Character Technologies and now the other one's against OpenAI, when you see the thread of conversations between those poor boys and the chatbots themselves, and you can see what's going on. You can see how that overly sycophantic technology is essentially just providing whatever that human is looking for. And we've known about this since, the ELIZA experiments in the mid-60s. We've known that these products just essentially take the last 3 or 4 words and twist it into another question, take that forward. If they don't understand something part of the question, they'll just say, what a great idea, tell me more. All these sort of things. But because we're gullible humans, at the end of the day, we tend to ascribe intelligence to something that seems to be able to talk. And we also think, it's playing on those vulnerabilities. If you are lonely, if you're sad, whatever, and this thing can come up with a few phrases that may cheer you up. We think it understands us. We think it emotes. We think that it sympathizes. All these anthropomorphisms, again, that the big tech companies and the providers of these products do nothing to say to us, but remember, it's just a machine. Remember, it's just, it's guessing, it's mimicking a therapist, it's mimicking a doctor, it's mimicking someone that can help you. It isn't actually something that can help you. If you are experiencing these issues, seek real advice from a real human being. But there's none of that, and that's what we've got to get to. So I think, long story short, I think it comes down to us. It comes down to we as citizens and consumers to actually apply the pressure ourselves. But in order to get there, we need a massive information campaign. We need an education campaign, which I think, people like ourselves, we are responsible. We have platforms. We need to continue to talk about this and tell everybody this isn't what you think it is.
You quite, we use the phrase, you talk about anthropomorphization, and we say chatbots do this. We say OpenAI does that. Neither of those two types of entity are actually human. They have no moral responsibility. All the models are code, chips, and wires. That's it. And the organizations are legal fictions. One of the threads that has emerged with other guests, and I'd really love your view on this, is do you think things might be easier to enforce if the senior executives, the directing minds of these organizations, were held personally and criminally liable for harms caused to other human beings?
Yes, I think it would certainly raise their attention to what could go wrong and get them thinking as individuals, but also as boards, around the area of responsibility. It amazes me that they're not. And there's various loopholes, of course, that they exploit, particularly in America, where, essentially it's the same law as the online platforms that are not responsible for the content that's carried across their wires. This is different. This is their own machines creating content which engages human beings. They are creating content. They are publishing. They're generating and publishing content. Now, I've long had an issue about this when it comes to social media as well. That the moment you start to moderate or whatever, you're acting as a publisher. Therefore, you're responsible for the content on the platform, which is why they've all fled from moderation. So again, the responsibility is down to the user to sort and sift and work out what's right and wrong and all that sort of stuff. Yes, I strongly agree with you on that. I had a brilliant interview with the lawyer that's involved in these two recent cases, the Character Technologies case and the OpenAI case. She's called Mitali Jain in America at the Tech Justice Law Project. And she had exactly the same conclusion that unless and until we have a proper legal framework around this, where these individuals are held liable and responsible, they will continue to do this, and they'll hide behind self-regulatory codes or certain people within the organization of when doing something right. We've heard that already. They openly admit to mistakes, but are they taking them down? Are they actually dismantling these technologies? No, they're not. They're discontinuing. They're tweaking at the edges. And there will be more, sad to say, there will be more horrible instances. But at what point as I say, at what point is there a tipping point and a consumer backlash and the realization that this is not something that we should be doing? I mean, in every town square in England, Roger, and how many hundreds of years ago, for bear baiting, we had public executions. Some reason these things change. We move on as a society, and we look back at it now and say, how barbaric, how ridiculous. What we'll be thinking in 100 years' time, looking back at what we're living through now. What you gave a completely unregulated machine the opportunity to engage in some of the darkest thoughts, the darkest moments that humans could ever go through, and actually advise them on how to create a noose, how to create a temporary raised platform, how to know whether or not the rail in the wardrobe would hold someone's weight. I mean, this is it's sick, totally sick.
Indeed. We've covered a huge amount so far. I'd like to just pitch towards a positive, hopeful future. So I've got 2 or 3 questions as we draw to a close. What do you think is the biggest AI risk within this area of media in the next 3 years that hasn't already emerged? What would your prediction be, is my first of these future predictions? I know that's not a very positive question, but, we will get there.
Yeah. I think the biggest risk of all is it down to the individual level. I spend a lot, obviously, that in my area, talking about the creative industries and talking about the relationship between generative AI and individual creators at the very sort of bedrock level of creativity. The biggest risk that I see is that we do outsource our thinking to these devices, to these machines, and we get lazy. And gradually, that creative spark disappears because we lean too heavily on the technology. And as I said before, all research studies, the Microsoft study, the MIT study suggests that the more we do that, the less we check the outputs, and the more we use it. So there's this constant circle that therefore transpires. But how individuals break out of that is very hard. It will probably take, again, a series of calamitous mistakes when they suddenly realize, oh my God, what was I doing? Now, we're seeing that in law, for instance. A number of lawyers in America, it's happened a couple of times here as well in the UK, but certainly in America, we're seeing lawyers being fined by courts for creating briefs with, made up citations and that sort of stuff. And that's an area where there's a huge amount of scrutiny of those briefs, of those documents. What about other sectors of society where there isn't that level of scrutiny? So it just makes you think, what else is out there where stuff is going into research reports and things, which, again, it's just been taken at face value. So that's the biggest risk that I see, that on an individual basis. And we've seen numerous examples of, there was a reporter on a newspaper in America in Wyoming. I mean, it's a sad story, but, for a couple of months, this reporter was using, I think it was ChatGPT, to make up quotes of local public figures. And no one spotted or complained, not even those public figures, because they probably came across better using the AI generated quotes. But a reporter on a rival newspaper spotted it and met up with that reporter. And unfortunately, the rookie reporter was sacked. But the editor said, he should have seen what was going on. He should have checked the quotes. He should have looked at all of this. But it's the over-reliance and not realizing that this isn't something you can just take verbatim. You have to check everything. That's what I see as the biggest risk, is that's all down to, again, it's this thing of it manufactures slop. We don't know if it's true or not. That then gets amplified by social media. It gets amplified within search. And it starts to erode the record of human knowledge. If we don't know that there's something in that record that is actually made up and is fictitious because no one's actually checked it or searched it, then in years to come, we'll be quoting stuff which is wrong. And that will just, again, amplify a problem. It'll just get worse and worse and worse. So very worried about the use of generative AI, particularly in scholarly writing, as they call it in America, or academic writing, as we call it here, with fake citations, hallucinated content, verbatim regurgitations of copyrighted content within scientific papers, within abstracts. I wrote something last week. It's a very large double-figure proportion of abstracts used to summarize scientific papers. Well, it's a good use of AI to do that, but it's going to introduce errors. And yet, hey presto, this was in Nature magazine. Hey presto, yes, there are errors riddled in academic writing. So we rely on that to keep that record of human knowledge pure, reliable, trustworthy, so that other researchers can then come along and quote that. And if they're quoting stuff which is wrong, or we take that as verbatim, it starts to get very dangerous. And it also just opens up that opportunity again for bad actors to basically quote stuff which fits their agenda, but is actually factually wrong. And that is, again, that is also worrying.
The grandson of very close friends of ours, I was chatting to him, he's just done his 11 plus, and he said to me, I've stopped watching YouTube shorts because they're rotting my brain.
Yes.
You quite rightly say the responsibility for the way we use these and the way that they're developed is ultimately personal and individual, because that's where morality rests ultimately. Where do you see people, young people like our friend's grandson, do you see enough of that happening to give us hope and to encourage them to recognize when something is rotting their brains?
Yes, I do. I mean, our generation tends to look at a younger generation, as I say, that's grown up with this as, they're sponges, that they just soak everything up, that they see everything and they take it at face value. But it's not always the case. They are actually more digitally literate than we ever have been. And I think they are also now more AI literate than our generation could ever be, because we're the vulnerable generation. It's people aged, dare I say it, like ourselves, slightly over 30. We're a generation that probably will take everything at face value because this is all novel and new. And we think, wow, that's incredible, isn't it? And we get lulled into that sense of this must be true because there's a human-like voice or interaction here. And there must be intelligence in here. But kids growing up, Gen Zs, Gen Alpha, they are aware that there is this thing out there which is creating this slop, and they can instantly tell. Now, they're also celebrating it. They also get that dopamine hit on TikTok, the 30-second AI-generated clip, but they know that there's nothing behind it. And whereas someone aged 65, 70 possibly wouldn't, they would also know how to generate this stuff because they're using the tools as well. So there may be that sense of comfort there. But as I say, it's the subset of that generation that is experiencing problems that turn to those products and overlook the fact that there is nothing there, but they think there is something there, that they think there's a human angle to this when at times of distress or where they need real help. Yeah, maybe there is in the long term, there's hope there from that generation that does recognize, because they can probably see there is a certain AI style to an image, particularly faces and scenes, that sense of perfection. Now, again, I'm worried that in 6 months' time, the next version of Google VO3 or whatever will start to introduce people whose teeth aren't completely perfect and white, and there may be some glitches, in a way that in the days of, wet film processing, where you had one shot of somebody at a wedding and their eyes are closed, but that's the shot that was taken and that's the only one that's going to go into the box now in the attic. But of course, AI immediately tidies all that up. But I have this other thought, which is that as time goes on and there is hopefully or potentially this backlash against what we're living through, that we will crave that authentic human-made content again. We've seen that in music with vinyl. And I think we will go back to that sense of we want to know that there's a human behind this, that there's a story behind this, there's a real actor with a real lived experience that we can identify with, that the band has, or the lyric writer of the band or the author of the book, has actually lived through this experience that they're writing about. And that authenticity overrides or overcomes that sense of relying on AI, that AI is seen as synthetic, generic, homogenous, has no feeling, has no emotion, and you couldn't interview the author. And the more we think about that, there's comfort there. Young people I talk to, they do have that sense of, when you talk about AI music, what do you think of this track or whatever? I read something recently where someone had it on in their home all day long, and if they wanted just to have some sort of lift music, just some mellow chill out music, AI is pretty good at that. Just constant stream of pat. But when they wanted something to actually listen to and really get their head into and understand, then it had to be a human-made band. And there's a certain sense that music that we listened to when we were growing up, that music is real music, that it's really real music, that the individuals behind it, we know all of their life stories. I mean, just take the entire evolution of the band, Fleetwood Mac, from an original blues band all the way through to the modern Fleetwood Mac that we know, and all the stories behind it, the breakup tunes, all of that, all the emotion. That's part of the appeal. I can't see how, was it the Velvet Sundown, that AI track that went around the world, or the AI band that went around the world recently, completely fabricated. I listened to some of their sloppy tunes, and it's just random words stitched together. There's nothing there, you can't identify with it.
You've made many, many points, but I'd just like to summarize 3. Firstly, you urge us not to take stuff generated by AI at face value. Check, and check again before you use us. You told us to be careful what documents we upload to our private photo store, passports, driving license, etc. There's a real risk that, like it or not, it could be used as training data for large language models, and perhaps most alarming of all, silver tie clips worn innocuously by other people can identify your voice and generate information about you in real time. Graham Lovelace, thank you so much for joining us and giving us such a clear insight into the truths and untruths of generative AI.
That's a pleasure, Roger. Thank you very much.
If you've enjoyed this conversation, you can watch the video version on YouTube or listen to the audio on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Please do like, subscribe, and share to help us grow this vital discussion. And join us next time on CHATROG as we continue to question our use of AI and not what it's just doing to our world, but what it should be doing for us going forward.